is a managing partner with HR Tech Alliances. Thanks, Marilyn.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ward, for coordinating this event. Amazing turnout as we look at the next coming days. So you're here, so you're interested in this session, but also would encourage you to take a second look at your calendar and participate at the events that we've got coming up, or the sessions that we've got coming up throughout the day and also into tomorrow. And so with that, I am honored to kick off our first session, which is 10 ways that ecosystems can leverage influencers. And I am your session leader, MPH, for those who know me, and for those who are getting to know me, I go by my initials. It works really well in the United States, miles per hour, but outside of the US, we don't do the metric system here. And so it works here, but I'd have to change my name to kilometer, something with a K, Katrina, right? Welcome, Katrina. And so I'm honored to be your session leader today. I have several decades in the space and really have my career is really, I would say, at the intersection of HR, of technology, and of business transformation. And work together with Ward and Howard Flint and an extended team of professionals. We provide consulting and advisory services to the founders and the senior leadership teams of organizations that are looking to scale up their business, go through pivots, enter new geographies, boldly go where others have gone before. So honored to again coordinate this session for you today. And in the spirit of having the dial go to 11, here are 10 ways that we're leveraging our influence, or that you can leverage your influencers today. And again, you can see we're a little bit more informal here. We're not a webinar, and so we definitely encourage conversation during the session, which hopefully is refreshing compared to some other events that we have the opportunity to participate in. But as we open up the floor to Pete and Brent and Nick and Ben, what we want to talk a little bit about is really, hopefully we're going to showcase their expertise. We're going to get their perspectives. We're going to talk a little bit about strategy, relevance, importance, where solution providers and vendors perhaps miss the mark in their motions with the ecosystem. And a few things along the lines of working with large platform providers, potentially talking about some great examples, maybe a few pet peeves, where's the innovation happening, and maybe a little bit of advice. So as normal, we have a more aggressive agenda than we have time. So Rianne, quick favor is if you could give me a 5-minute warning as we're approaching kind of our transition to the next time, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, ma'am. That's my job.
That's your job. Just sorry, sticking to it.
Yep.
And with that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and start with the introduction of our panelists. And so, Pete, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, that would be fantastic. And then we'll go to Nick, Brent, and Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'll always appreciate attending your events, and hope this will be helpful for everyone. So yeah, I'm Pete Tiliakis. I am a director and principal analyst at ISG, and I lead our HR research practice. And yeah, just really happy to be here again. So thank you.
Very good. Hey, and Pete, maybe you could just tell just a little bit about your area of expertise, and take us a little bit farther into the description.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So my background is quite. I've been an analyst now for I guess about 5.5 years. Previously was with Nelson Hall and had led their research program there, and now I've come to ISG to do that. But my scope really kind of covers HR tech and services. So I'd say primarily I lean heavier towards the outsourcing services. I spend a lot of time certainly in the payroll space. That's probably what I'm most known for. I also cover the global employer of record space, which is a very payroll heavy solution, but it is certainly becoming much more than that. It's very similar to your PEO model in the US. It's now being used globally where and how it can be. So I focus a lot on that one. And then also I work closely with the HRO providers, obviously around services, but also the HCM technology platforms. So your bigger suites, right? The Workdays, Success Factors, and on down through the market down into the iSolves and Dayforce, those sort of platforms. And then certainly just keep my eye out on trends in the tech space in general. So I'll certainly get involved in some of the niche areas that connect off of those things. So, for example, payroll. A lot of my time is spent around with the earned wage providers, right? FinTech. So just depends on what's going on in that space. But those are kind of the three core areas that I focus on. Probably with an emphasis heavier on services, and then of course tech being the enabler to those services in a lot of cases. So a lot of ground to cover.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nick.
Yeah, so I am Nick Byron. I am the founder and CEO of 360 Insight. Have about 25 years in tech experience, a little over 16 in the research space. And the interesting thing is I've covered a lot of different areas from a research standpoint, starting with wireless and mobility back with the BlackBerry was just starting to come out of the woodwork. Application performance management, telecom expense management, sales and marketing enablement, banking and payments, financial applications, and of course, HCM. Started 360 Insights because we just started to really see that there was an increasing challenge with the decision-making processes that has changed over the years, where it used to be IT. Now you have line of business, finance, executives, and committees all taking part in the decision-making process, making it infinitely more complex. So we really, from 360 Insights, try to help organizations make better decisions. And then on top of that, we try to help them understand how to get the most out of their investments. So thank you all for having me, and looking forward to participating.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. Brent.
You might be on mute.
You're mute, Brent.
I am muted. That's the
Awesome.
first time this happened to me in a little while. I am Brent Skinner. I'm the, thank you, co-founder of 360 Insight and director of and principal analyst leading the HCM practice area. And Nick did a great job of describing what we do at 360 Insights. Just a little bit more about me. I've been a swimmer in many lanes of the HCM space. I was started out in executive recruiting, not as an executive recruiter, but looking at the profession and doing some research in that, and was an HRO today, technology editor for a stint. Then I've been on the inside, on the vendor side, a couple of times. First at Ceridian as a corporate ghostwriter, working closely with a lot of their C-level and SVP executives, helping them develop their thought leadership as a partner to them. And then later at Cornerstone On Demand, working in their thought leadership and advisory services division, helping pre-sales, help their prospects understand project the ROI that they would likely achieve by updating and modernizing their learning and performance management, mostly solutions. And previously was an analyst at Nucleus Research in between the Ceridian and Cornerstone stints, and where I learned a lot about return on investment for technology deployments. And a little piece of trivia, Nick was also at Nucleus Research, but a few years before I joined. So that's the connection there. And now with 360 Insights.
Oh, fantastic. Mr. Ben, you're up.
All right. Hey, everybody. So glad to be here. Looking forward to a fun conversation and honestly learning from some of these other guys, what they have to say, their backgrounds, experience too. So it's going to be a ton of fun. I'm the chief research officer over at Lighthouse. So it's my job to understand the things that employers are most concerned with and try to translate those insights, those ideas back over into how companies should be building their technology, what strategy they should be using on the marketing side to tap into those pain points, things like that. So the area of focus that I cover is pretty much everything under the spectrum of human capital management, from employee experience to core HR to learning development, talent acquisition. Part of that draw for me is tell everybody I'm professionally curious. I love just doing the research and understanding what those priorities are. But the other side of that, honestly, is the fact that before I was a research nerd, as I like to call myself, I was a practitioner in the trenches. So I've ran an HR team. I've had the responsibility. I've felt the weight of filling a number of recs as a recruiter. And so I get to bring that practical side of things to blend with the research and really help, again, understand what's happening out there. And it is my job, and I'll speak for everybody here, but a big part of our job for everybody here, we'll get into this in the panel, is taking all the things that we're understanding and consuming about what's happening in the space and trying to make that very practical and actionable for the people we talk to. So looking forward to doing that for all of you today.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And again, appreciate you investing the time today from your daily activities to really give back to the community and share and network and all of that. So with that, Ben, that was a really good segue into our first official panel discussion question. But it's really opening up this for everybody. I mean, there's so much happening in our space. Just out of curiosity, how do you guys keep up with everything that's going on? Any tips or techniques that you could share? I mean, Ben, you kind of paved the way on this discussion, but
I'll start us off.
Yeah, how does that work for you?
So I'll tell you that I actually have a bunch of personalized alerts and customized notifications, things like that set up so that I don't have to keep track and have to go out there and search this stuff all the time. Thankfully, a lot of those things come to me because I've set up the searches for them to get notified when something happens, a big funding or something else in our space. I do, just to throw something out there, I do follow what's happening in the Star Conspiracy newsletter. I read that every week. A lot of us probably do. And so there's always some good stuff, some good nuggets and insights in there. And I'll just say one thing we're going to hear a lot probably from the other panelists about what they look at inside the space, but I'll be a little contradictory and say I spend a lot of time reading things outside of our bubble and trying to find connections from those things into our space. So, The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath is about creating great customer experiences. I read that and looked at how we can use that to create great employee experiences, for example. So I love taking those things from outside our world and trying to find some way to translate that, find a metaphor there, something else that makes that apply to the people that we talk to in this space. So that's a couple of things that I do to try to stay on top of it. But to be honest with you, that could be its own full-time job, is just trying to stay on top, much less actually sharing some of those things back with the rest of the world. There's a lot going on.
Oh, brilliant. Pete,
Yeah.
what do you do? What's your daily routine when you?
Yeah, I love this question because I remember the first time I was asked this by someone. We were having a drink at a conference years ago, and I remember stepping back and the inventory of how I was doing things really hit me. So yeah, I mean, I think as an analyst, we kind of need to have our pulse on, air quotes, everything that's going on, and that's impossible sometimes. So yeah, I'm like Ben. I try to use a number of, looking at press releases. I started using something recently I like, and I know there's a few tools out there, but I started using something called Feedly, which will push, you can tell it different things you want to track, and it will push, relevant terms or hashtags or even just specific websites to you, and kind of dashboard it. So I've been using something like that to kind of help culminate a lot of those things. I love to have, too. I like Ben's point about looking sort of outside. I like to read news around the economy and different things going on in the world to kind of understand how it might be impacting what's happening in my space. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the other things I love to do is really, your forum is great for kind of staying up on some of the new providers. But I like to really try to have a regular dialogue with the major vendors that I'm working with to make sure that we're kind of, I don't like having that sort of what I call it, kind of like a vampire analyst sort of approach where it's like, hey, I just come to you when I want something. I really try to have kind of an open dialogue with them so that they push things to me. I love the self-serve tools that some of the vendors provide where you can go and get some AR kind of updates and videos and things like that, because we can't always make every session. So really collectively, all of those things I try to bring together to keep me kind of up to speed. And of course, Twitter and LinkedIn are great too, right? If you've missed something, there's something you're not watching, someone somewhere is probably talking about it, and you can catch it. Certainly, I absolutely follow all of my peers here on this forum, but even across the market, and some of them will even bubble up things that I wasn't aware of. So really, it's kind of a full court press. You really have to kind of be coming at it from a lot of different angles, I believe, and really staying engaged with it. But you can kind of get the knack, right? After a while, it starts to become a rhythm, from what I've found. But the tools, I've started using more tools lately to try and help out with that.
Love that suggestion. Nick, how do you keep up?
Yeah, it's a combination of everything that the others already mentioned, but we also kind of what Peter also talked about is the direct relationship with the vendors. Having those direct relationships with the vendors, we constantly try to ask them to, share information with us ahead of time. Because sometimes once the announcements happened, it might be actually a little bit too late to really cover that from a research perspective. So we always encourage our clients to let us know ahead of time. And, the great thing is that we don't ask for money from a perspective of being able to update the research analysts, because some organizations you have to have a paid relationship in order to do that. We really want to maintain that relationship with our clients, regardless of whether they pay or not, to know what's going on. And then we also have our Global Executive Advisory Council, which is made up of vendors and end users. And that also works really well to keep us informed of what's going on. So it sometimes can almost be a full-time job, especially if you have an active week or month from updates. I think it was earlier this month, there was 1 week where we had multiple updates from just acquisitions and partnerships. So sometimes it can be a very busy time.
Yeah, I love what you guys have done with the Global Executive Advisory Council. That's a great idea. Brent, any secret tips that you could pass along so we could keep up?
Nick shared all my secret tips, so I'll try to come up with another one here.
Yeah.
I'll just double down just here a little bit on the Global Executive Advisory Council. We really value those relationships, and we're always having conversations with those folks. This is not just sort of a formal thing. We have individual conversations with many of the we have a vendor side and also a user side, and we'll bounce ideas off them all the time, often have impromptu calls with some of our contacts in the industry. And just, I think the other folks here really touched on most. I would just kind of, just to put sort of an exclamation point on this, or just an underscore maybe, is that, any analyst who says that they cover everything and know everything, if they say they cover everything, that's true. If they know everything, they're definitely bluffing. There's no one person that knows everything in this industry. And that's why, as a solution vendor, it's important to kind of spread your relationships in the analyst influencer space so that you're covering all your bases.
What I hear is a little bit of advice too, because there's so much that's out there that we've got specialists in some very specific areas. And a lot of the solution providers that do depend upon analysts and influencers in their go-to-market need a variety of areas to be supported by, right? Great point. All right, next question here. And Pete, let me do a shout out to you on this. And the graphic here, these are actually googly eyes, not a big cookie. But depending upon how you look at it, but it would be good to get your views on, how and in what ways the topic of alliances and partnerships comes up during your motions with the ecosystem.
Yeah. I'd say the easy answer, the short answer would be it's increasingly more important, right? I think for me, I might have a little bit of a larger slant towards this just because of working with the HCM tech providers, working with the payroll providers. Partnerships and integrations are really big, right? They're needing to offer HCM, right? Workday, for example, is needing to offer a lot of different solutions to fill white spaces, to meet client unique requirements, sector requirements, and on and on. And I think payroll is a lot of the same thing, right? That's been a really big thing for them over the last few years. I've spent a lot of time working with the payroll providers, a lot of the global payroll providers, really trying to figure out what solutions they need to be connecting to, who they should be partnering with. And not just HCM to payroll, but also some of those sort of marketplace kind of capabilities that they can round out their offering and make more value available to their customers and their employees they're serving. So for me, it's been a very big topic as both of those sides have really been trying to build out those programs. But I think that it depends on the offering, right? I mean, some firms, it's more than just having a partner integration to sort of solve something. It's also about channel partners. It's also about creating more opportunity to connect to more buyers. and fundamentally just bring more value to the ecosystem. So I would say the topic is it always comes up. It is something that we in our research we always look for when we're evaluating vendors. We are looking at their marketplaces and their partner programs, where they're investing, what they're looking to do with it, and how well they leverage it to benefit their customers. So very, very much an important topic. And I think it's going to get even more important as we continue to go and you see more investments in microservices and APIs. Everyone really wants that experience that is seamless, right? They want to be able to say, hey, regardless of what's going on sort of in the background to the employee, it should be unknown to them. It should all just look and feel good. So I think that, those things, that way of working and connecting things is only going to intensify from what we see on the roadmaps. And certainly these partnerships are both a way for firms to shore up their solutions, but also really bring more value to the table and maybe bring in things that they don't have an intention to build. So very important. And I think it's increasingly more important depending upon what space you're studying and what type of vendor you're looking at. What space you're studying and what type of vendor you're looking at.
Thank you. No, that's really good. We have another question out here where we're gonna dive deeper into this topic here.
Yeah.
But before we do that, maybe we could take a step back and maybe Brent, maybe you could comment on this here a little bit. Why is it important for solution providers and vendors to have a strategy that focuses on analysts and influencers, regardless of the size? We've got a lot of niche innovation and smaller vendors that are just coming to the table, and then we've got the giants and the elephants, if you would. But why is this important?
I just think that there's a lot of upside in it for startups or late stage startups, niche players. A lot of the folks that we work with, this is not the only type of vendor that we work with, but a lot of the vendors we work with are late stage startup or they're smaller, or they're very focused, narrowly focused on a certain point solution. And some of the point solutions emerging in the space are pretty interesting, by the way, but that's a tangent I won't get into at the moment. But there's also a lot of competition in those niches, and so it's challenging. There's I won't mention the names of the company, but there's a couple of companies that come to mind that are both kind of doing the same sort of innovation, the new take on performance management, more of a continuous performance, dialogue, and without giving away some of the messaging. But there's a need to work with vendors, with analyst firms and influencers to help you hone your messaging so that you're not saying the same thing that maybe your competition is, or maybe you're figuring out a way to just kind of rise above the din in a particularly crowded, new emerging space. Right.
We could probably do the whole session. Maybe we should do a whole session in our future virtual collaboration zone just on this one question, right? But what I heard you say, Brent, is the idea of a competitive differentiation, and can be a real key in being able to understand what's happening and perhaps pick your place in the ecosystem.
And sorry to interrupt, but I would just also add as well that you're never too small or too niche to need some help to make an impression on your prospects, right? And so so for instance, one of the things that 360 Insights does is we're not the only one that does this, but we'll publish case studies in in anatomies of decision, and these are very useful, informative documents about how your customers have been successful with your solution. And it's always useful to have a third party publishing something like that as opposed to yourself. It has more impact, and right. So no matter what kind of a vendor you are, how large or small, you can have a real impact and really turbocharge your sales process, I think, with these types of things.
Right. So it really is about understanding how and in what ways you're leveraging the influencer community in your go-to-market motions, and that it's not just for the big vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. And so, yeah, I don't know if anyone else here on the panel has anything else they wanted to add here.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'll say one thing is, from another perspective, if you look at the analysts and influencers, that are constantly doing two things. They're constantly publishing on the industry, and they're constantly talking to end users. And Brent kind of touched upon this, that the ecosphere for HCM vendors, it's huge. It's really, really large. There are a lot of vendors out there. If you look at each category, there could be 20, 30, 40 vendors in each category. And it's quite impossible, kind of what we talked about earlier, to keep updated on everything that's going on from the vendor community perspective. So if you're not updating the analysts and influencers, they're not going to know about what your platform is about. They're not going to know what's coming down the pipeline. And quite honestly, they're not going to be able to more accurately publish or write about you in their research or their writings. And then on top of that, if they're talking to customers and a customer happens to ask about your platform and you're not talking to them, quite honestly, they're not going to be able to accurately talk about you as well. So that's another very important part, that analysts and influencers constantly writing and they're constantly talking to end users. And quite honestly, if you're not talking to them and your competition is, they're most likely to cover them or talk about their solution versus yours.
Yeah, Nick, that's really well said. And Jim Jensen, thank you for the comment in chat. Right, it's leveraging the influencer and analyst community can be a really fast path to building your awareness when there's a sea of many
Yeah.
and a lot of competing topics, particularly for the larger vendors. And so, yeah, I'm envisioning a whole session just on this one question. So in the interest of keeping it moving, let me move into the next one here. And this is kind of related here, but to what extent does the quality, so this is diving a little bit deeper into what Pete was talking about, to what extent does the quality of the solution provider's marketplace, ecosystem, partnership program factor into the analyst views? Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, if Ben, would you mind?
Absolutely. So we're going to be repetitive. We have, and we're going to continue it probably for everybody else out there, but this matters. It's absolutely part of this bigger picture of what you're doing. There've been names thrown out for big vendors that are out there that are trying to be everything, and they know they can't be everything, and we know they can't be everything to everyone. The second a company says, no, we're moving to this one thing, we all know that within the next year, they're going to be looking for that other thing to shore up whatever gap they've discovered exists there. And that's not an indictment on the big players in the space. It's just, you can't be as functionally capable in every area of the spectrum as any individually focused company could be. So we see that factors into this bigger picture of how we understand and how we vet and how we recommend those companies. You heard from one of the panels just a minute ago. I, in the last year, have had 3 separate conversations where someone came to me. One of our people in our community was looking for a solution for recruiting. One of them was looking for a solution in the learning space. One of them was looking for a new payroll solution globally. And in each of those cases, I could point them back to, this company is going to work with because they work well with the other providers that are out there. I don't recommend them because they're the Lone Ranger, they're the whatever, they're the toughest one. No, because they work well with whatever you have right now, because that's the thing that they're looking for. Honestly, they don't want to uproot everything else and try to figure out how to make that all work. And it's painful, it's challenging, and from a career perspective, that puts them at a lot of risk, honestly, to have to do all those things and hope that it works out. They'd much rather say, no, we have a great partner over here that's going to work well with this, so that we can go in on that decision and just know everything else can remain the same. We'll just bring them in to solve for that problem we have. So we could spend a lot of time diving into this and what that looks like, but just a recommendation there that if you've already heard, you can be updating the community about these things. But I'll say this factors into how we see your company. I know there's in those conversations when I make recommendations, hey, go talk to these two companies in each of those cases, because we don't recommend one specific vendor for things. I'll tell you that there were some that were dropped from that list because I knew for a fact that I had heard from other companies, other customers, that they were difficult to work with. So that gets you into the top of that list, and that makes you much more appealing in every possible way when you lead with that sort of relationship.
Yeah, the ability to work together is such an important part, and that the innovation happens at the edges. The big providers aren't necessarily going to be first to market in almost anything, right? And so, so one of the things that we've talked about, maybe this exists somewhere, and you guys can help, shore up my knowledge here. Will we ever have an analyst firm cover the partnership program and put together a 4-box of some sort? Ability to execute, ease of working together. I mean, you can picture what this might look like, but are we going to potentially look at some point in time in bringing the partner program discussion to the table in the analyst briefings in a meaningful and deep way that other areas like the tech stack gets scrutinized, or ability to execute, or whatever dimensions on your X and Y axis? Might we ever see this, or does it exist? Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I know at ISG, it's an important part of each of our projects. We put an emphasis on partner, the breadth, depth, and quality of partners, the investments they're making, firms are making in partners, marketplace, channel partners, all of that sort of thing. So we do look at that totality. Do we do it as a standalone report? Not currently. We do have some platform ecosystem sort of reports for the big platforms where we do dig into this a little bit. That might actually be similar to what you're sort of envisioning, but yeah, no, I think this is a very important component, and I think it's more important for certain products maybe than others. But to Jim's point around the big HCM, right? A rich partner program is really key to filling gaps and meeting client needs. So yeah, no, this is interesting, but I would say we put a very big emphasis on this. We understand, all the things that Ben said are 100% true in that that quality of that ecosystem lends to the experience and the value for the customer, and we certainly want to factor that into our analysis.
It's good to hear. It's good to hear. It kind of goes back to a point you made earlier in that it's emerging, but what we've pondered is if there was a full-on report along these lines on ease of working together or cost effectiveness, something like that it could potentially lead to some better collaboration down the road by driving accountability. All right. Let's see here. All right. On that note, again, kind of diving into this a little bit. So how important is it? You can see my bias here in the questions. It's just kind of oozing out. But how important is it that the solution provider community plays well with each other?
I'll throw an example
How
out
have
there.
we done? And how have we done in this regard? Are we a work in progress? Are we there yet?
Everything's a work in progress, Marilyn. Come on now.
Right. You're totally right. Thoughts,
So
reflections?
I was going to throw an example out there really quickly of a company we worked with in the last year that when I think about the idea of really deeply partnering with other organizations in space, it's a good example for me because it helps me. We talk about there's this whole big range. And that's one of the difficulties I would argue to Pete's point about trying to do some sort of quadrant or something on this space. The difficulty is there are everything from this very official, we've done a press release, but who knows what's actually going to come out of that partnership, all the way to we have deep embedded functionality in the products, and we're working together and we're co-selling together and those kinds of things. So there's this broad range, and that makes it really hard to say they're doing it well or not, because that may or may not fit into their strategy as a company.
Right.
I'll say that this company that I'm thinking of, one of the things that they've done is they have divorced themselves from any sort of hold on their UX. They said, we built this, it gets the job done, but it doesn't have to be the way it gets done. So we would much rather embed this into the 2 or 3 kind of key partners we have and let the the end user get the benefit of that, let them get the benefit of having that embedded in that one place instead of having to go to a separate destination to use this tool. And we don't care about whether someone uses our user interface or not, because that's not where the value really is. The value is in whatever problem it's solving. And so I think that kind of thing exemplifies for me what it means to play well. This company just leads with, we don't care if you use this front end or not, as long as the benefit is there, as long as we're partnering together, as long as your customers are served well, that's what matters to us. So again, that's kind of a specific example, but that's one of the things that I see as we're putting your customers' benefits, we're putting the way that we work together on a higher level than this other thing that may or may not be important to us. That doesn't work for every tool, that doesn't work for every situation, but that's one of the things that popped in my head when I saw the question that I thought was relevant.
One thing I'll say, one of the biggest, we talk to end users all the time, and that's one of the things that we try to do is talk to as many end user organizations as possible. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest negatives that we hear is when a vendor is not easy to work with or doesn't play well with others. So, for example, if they're standing up an environment and they're trying to connect to something else and it's just not working, that's very much a negative for them. And we hear those complaints more than we hear other complaints, like a feature functionality situation might not be working. It's more when it's not integrating well with other environments. And then as we talk to the vendors, the ones that get it are the ones that really understand that they need to really have that type of connectivity. The ones that don't get it are almost the ones that think that they know better than the end users, and they're like, they don't need that functionality, or thinking that they might have a tool that can use it, that can do just as good. For example, analytics is one of those things that every vendor tries to embed it in themselves, and some do okay, some not so okay, and then some do a great job. But a lot of vendors want the ability to potentially plug in another analytics program that can really help them out and really get more out of the platform. And again, it's all about the usability and functionality within that connectivity. That, again, one of the biggest complaints we get is when a end user tries to do something and tries to connect with another platform and the system that they're using just doesn't allow it. And then the vendor isn't allowing them to do that when they try to reach out to them and say, hey, we need this fixed.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real serious issue. I mean, we've been at it a long time. We talk a big game about having an Amazon-like experience, and the reality is that the end customers have a complex tech stack. In fact, I wanted to showcase just a quick snippet here from HR.com. And Brent, I know you've been involved in basically talking about the state of the HR tech stack report. And this comes out it's been coming out every year for at least several years. And just pulling this out here is only 1 in 5 say that the HR tech stack components integrate extremely well with one another. So it seems like, again, there's a mechanical side of this, there's the playing well, there's the co-selling, there's so many different direct dimensions of this. But it seems like just kind of as a industry, as a space, we definitely have some work to do, right? There's a lot of pain there at the user level, right? Big gap between employee experience, if you would, and what we're delivering as a vendor community. And I'm not saying that's easy to do, but it seems like we've got a little bit of work to do along those lines.
I would just add, I know we have other questions to get to, but I would just add quickly as well. And I love Mark Vickers and working with them. I think it was a couple of years ago on this particular report. But if you look at it from a competitive standpoint, also for vendor, let's go back to niche vendors, right? Let's say you're a niche vendor, late stage startup, and you have some sort of a very sort of innovative, forward-thinking, modern solution for. Well, let's stay with performance enablement, for instance, right? There's a lot of HRIS providers, full HCM suite providers out there that have some sort of a performance management solution in their a module in their suite, right? And the quality of it runs a gamut. Some are kind of forward thinking, others are more conventional, very much annual review based and all this, or mostly just focused on automation. I'm getting into the weeds here, but the point is that If you are a player in that space, the last thing you want to do is go out there and say, yeah, we're the best thing since sliced bread. You don't need that anymore. Go with us instead. And instead, you want to go in there and say, hey, we can complement what you already have. So if you're thinking about, vendors working better, working well together, nicely together, it's also a competitive thing, and it's we can do this together, and we can complement each other, as opposed to going in there sort of hard-headedly and trying to sort of beat out the established players. That's one thing that came to mind for me.
Lots there. All right, so again, we've got a lot going for us, but then there's some room for improvement. But as we stand back and we look at this topic, where do you think some solution providers might be missing the mark when it comes to partnerships, alliances, and collaboration activity? Right, there's a range of capability, there's a range of who's doing it well versus not. Are there any patterns that you're seeing?
So I'll say one thing that I've noticed, because I've also been on the sales side, and I've been on the sales side at organizations like Oracle and HubSpot and others that have very large partner system ecospheres. And one of the things that I'd say is the biggest mistake is once you make that partnership, thinking that the job is going to be done by the partner. There was another organization I was at was SAP Insider, which is all we did was work with SAP partners. And some of them, the holy grail of working with them is becoming a Solex provider, basically being a line item within the SAP product mix. And a lot of vendors would think that once you made it to that point, the SAP reps, the hundreds or thousands of reps that they'd have, would all of a sudden start selling your platform and the work would be done for you. The reality is that there's a lot of partners that they already have. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of partners that integrate with SAP, Oracle, and so on and so forth. And that's the reality is that the ones that actually got sold were the ones that were constantly in front of those vendors and the sales reps. For example, at Oracle, we would have partners come in all the time educating us on what they did. And those are the ones that got brought into deals because they were at the top of mind within the sales reps when the opportunity came up. So it's one thing that I always see is that some vendors, they think it's a set it and forget it thing. You make the partnership and you move on, but you really have to stay in front of the reps and the marketing teams within those vendors to make sure that they're constantly reminded of you, because if you're not doing it, again, someone else is doing it and you're going to get looked over.
Right. And do you think that the analysts, the influencer community can help really support that motion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it goes back to, I think, what I said earlier. And it's a constant theme with me is if you just think you're going to set it and forget it, it's a losing strategy. And if you're not in front of the analysts and influencers, again, if they're talking to a Workday, if they're talking to an SAP, if they're talking to an Oracle, and you're not top of mind, they might overlook you when the opportunity arises. And the same thing, end users are constantly asking those questions too. Who works with who, and other, when should we, when is a point solution better than a platform? And if you're not talking to the influencers and analysts, they may know you, but they may not. And there's a lot of vendors out there, and it's kind of a dogfight between, getting awareness and getting in front of the analysts and influencers. And if you're just sitting back and you're not talking to them, you're going to get overlooked. And a lot of analysts and influencers don't charge to talk to them, don't charge to brief them, don't charge to get to know each other. And that's an important thing because it's kind of free awareness that you're just being overlooked if you're not just briefing the analyst and not spending time with them.
That's like a perfect segue into our next question, which is, who's doing it well, right? Or who has done it well in the past? Can you think of any organizations or categories that just made a real difference in what it was that they were doing. I mean, it kind of gets in a little bit into innovation or just good, consistent execution, right? Or a mindful strategy and approach. I don't know. I want to put anyone have anything that they wanted to volunteer, blurt out, or Pete?
Yeah, I'll maybe get us started. I mean, I said this earlier, I think, but I think the HCM tech providers have done a really good job, right? They have the biggest, often, at least in the HR space, groups of partner ecosystems. And some of that is out of necessity, right? They need to fill white spaces. They need to address things that they're not doing maybe yet or planning to. So yeah, I'd say a lot of them, I think, have pioneered the way a lot of firms have modeled their own sort of partner solutions together. But yeah, I mean, I really think that, you know, kind of going back to those points that we've heard along the way about what makes it great is it's not just tech, right? You can't just set it and forget it. It is, I think Ben pointed out, a relationship, right? You really have to cultivate those partner relationships and make it a two-way street. There's got to be value for both sides. But yeah, I think the HCMs you could look to is a really good model for the breadth, depth, and sort of management of those environments. And I think they've done, you know, a lot of them have done a really good job of bringing together a volume of solutions that can meet a wide range of needs. And I don't know that that's necessarily what you have to do with every offering. You certainly have to tailor it to what your customers want and where your gaps are and where you're headed. But fundamentally, I think the more you can cultivate a quality, you know, value added environment ecosystem, and you have good relationships and they are working and you are showing value through maybe results, right, to the client together as a joint solution, I think that's gonna boost your performance of this investment. So yeah, I'd look to the HCMs as a good example for where to start.
Right. I mean, you might not feel like that they're good examples if you're on the receiving end of them, but if you look at how big the ecosystem is and how much they need to digest and process, yeah. Well, and kind of the other side of that, maybe Nick, some thoughts on when you work with a solution provider vendor community, what is your biggest pet peeve?
So I have two. One of them comes up to mind is when vendors just show up and throw up in their briefing. They come with the deck, and their goal is to make it through their 100-slide deck, and they don't leave it to questions. They just kind of, I find that the best briefings that we've had were the ones that you spend more time just in conversation, and not just your goal is to go and get that deck and go through it 100%. And then the other one that I'll add, because I've actually been seeing it a little bit more happen more increasingly, are these group briefings. I've been seeing it more often where it used to be vendors would do their tour and they talk to all the different influencers and analysts, and they do it independently. But now what I'm starting to see is they're doing these group calls. And what I'm finding is that they're not very informative, because they go through the deck. It doesn't encourage questioning, because an analyst doesn't want to show their cards to another competing analyst, so they may not ask a question in fear that the answer that they may think is very valuable may actually inform another analyst of something that they were thinking might be a kind of a secret sauce type of thing. So I just find that those blanket, let's set up a 1-hour analyst briefing and invite all the influencers analysts to, they're just very bland, versus when they're one-on-one and you get a lot more interaction with that vendor and a lot more discussion. And again, that follows through that when you do have those one-on-ones, not showing up and throwing up, not going there with a 100-page slide deck with the sole goal of making it all the way through. You really should have a goal of having a conversation with the analysts and influencers.
Right.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, I would add to that, one thing I think sometimes I see vendors do that, I mean, it's not that it's a pet peeve, but I think it doesn't communicate the message well around the offering. Is a lot of times firms will come in and see it as a sales opportunity, and it's not a sales opportunity. We're not buying the solution. It's an education opportunity, right? We talked earlier about one of the key things about being able to know what's going on with all these products is, at ISG we have a massive HR consultancy. And they're constantly coming to me and saying, hey, I'm working with a customer in the Middle East and they need to know about payroll solutions in the Middle East. Who do you recommend that we should be looking at? And right? And so someone, if someone brings me a challenge, I need to be able to come to them with solutions that can help with that. So I think the more that you can educate the analyst versus selling them on it, right? They're not buying it. They're really needing to unpack it and understand it in a way that they can communicate it to the market is really what the goal is. So less sales and more of an education session is ideal.
That's great advice in terms of it shouldn't be your sales deck
Yeah.
that you're using with your analyst and influencer community. And in fact, that's as we're getting nudged for our couple minute warning, it's a perfect segue into the last question is what advice do you have specifically for alliances and partnership executives and senior leaders who are interested in this topic as it relates to working with the influencer community?
First, Marilyn.
Yeah, please. Absolutely.
Okay, I was gonna give Pete the high five virtually after that last comment there. I'll say really quick, people, when I talk to vendors, sometimes like, well, we don't have time to get to that stuff. If you don't have time to get to some of those partner things, it can be very simple. I just posted something in the chat. It's a great example of this. But also, don't spend 20 minutes telling us why HCM is important because we already get that. That's why we're there. We want to hear what the product is doing and how you're serving customers. So cut that out and focus more on the other stuff. That's helpful. The only other thing I was going to throw in there is this has been used in the whole conversation today, analyst and influencer kind of interchangeably. And I would argue that the people represented here on the panel are more analyst than influencer. I try to stay away from that title because a lot of people who are a practitioner in HR say, oh, I'm an influencer, but they don't actually cover the market like we do. They don't sit there on try to figure out what all happens, over the weekend or what are the latest funding announcements or what are the latest product capabilities. They don't have time for that because they have a real job doing HR day to day. So I would just caution that those should not be used interchangeably because the way that we look at the world is different and it should be. Those opinions and insights are valuable in their own right, but it's a different thing you're going to get from a different audience.
Yeah, I debated whether or not to go into that even in our panel. And I thought, oh my gosh, we could, yeah, it seems like
Yes.
tell me if this is true or not. Here's the way I make a distinction. I think all analysts in their own right are influencers. Not all influencers are analysts.
I could go along with that.
That's fair. Yeah.
Right. So Chad and Cheese, are they influencers or analysts? They're podcasters and right. Who drink a lot, by the way.
That was a big sigh.
Right.
I heard a big sigh in the background there.
So yeah, there's a lot of different textures and a lot of them, I'm one of the CEOs that we had worked with last year. She said, MPH, is everything a pay to play? I'm like, well, do you think that all of this, what everyone's doing is for free? So you have to look at your budget and you have to look at your demand generation engine and look at the digital assets and the content and your strategy and your thought leadership and say, do you want to put this on Fiverr or do you want to have proper, well thought out assets that are intelligent and meaningful to your very educated end buyer? And right. And so it's not just kind of like the word of mouth, it's all of the motions that end up going into that demand generation engine. That would be a little bit of my 2 cents here. We're over.
We need to wrap. Yes.
Yeah,
we need to wrap it up. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
So much amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Brent. Thank you,
Thanks for having
Ben. Really appreciate it.
Amazing information. Thank you to the panel and MPH for putting that together.